Welcome to the new Magoosh New GRE webinar. My name is Han-Soo Lee. I'm the CEO of Magoosh. I wanted to congratulate you on taking an important step towards furthering your education. We know that preparing for the GRE is not easy, but we at Magoosh are committed to getting you the GRE score that you need and getting you into the school that you want to get into. And so that's why we're putting together this webinar today. So over the next hour, we're going to give you the foundation that you can build off of as you prepare for the GRE. So here's a quick agenda. First, we're going to start with an introduction of all the presenters. Then Lele will talk about the new GRE basics. Brent Hanneson will then talk about the new GRE math section. Professor Dave Scalise will then talk about the new GRE Verbal section. We're going to end with some Q&A, so feel free to ask questions throughout. If we don't answer your questions during the main presentation, we'll get to them during the Q&A session. And then finally, we'll wrap up. So a quick introduction about Magoosh. Over the past year, the Magoosh team has been focused on building the best test prep product for the new GRE, and I can say with confidence that we know the GRE better than anybody. Other companies might be more well-known, but unlike them, our whole team lives and breathes this new exam every day. So you can view Magoosh as your secret weapon to conquer the new GRE. So a little bit about myself. Here's an overview of my background. I've been deeply involved in building internet products and education startups for many years, and I'm putting my passion and expertise into Magoosh. But the real stars of today are Chris, Brent, and Dave. They're the content developers for the new GRE product, and they'll be your primary presenters today. Lele is a graduate of UCLA, and he has over 10 years of teaching experience. He's coached several students to a 400-point score improvement, and he himself has scored a 1590 out of a 1600 and can routinely get a near perfect score with about half the time remaining. Brent Hanneson will talk about math. He has over 20 years of teaching experience. He's been a star instructor for a major GRE test prep company, the Renner Center of Calgary, and the University of British Columbia. He's earned his master's in math education, among a few other degrees. Dave will be presenting on Verbal today. He has over 25 years of teaching experience. He's a full tenured professor at the University of San Francisco and has published test prep material that has helped over 50,000 students worldwide. Margaret is our director today. She'll be fielding your questions in the questions box, and she's a graduate of UC Berkeley and has been a star tutor for a large test prep company. So with that, I'll pass it over to Chris on the basics of the new GRE.
Okay, hello everybody. I am going to cover the basics on the new GRE, and I'm going to start here with the major changes. So as you may have heard, there will no longer be antonyms and analogies. And those are two types of questions from the old verbal section that were heavily dependent on vocabulary. So neither of those will be there anymore. What will be on the new GRE are questions called multiple answer questions, and this is very different. In the past, there's only been one answer. Now, there can be multiple answers. In the case of reading comprehension, for instance, there can be 3 possible answers, and therefore, it could be 1 answer, 2 answer, or 3 answers. It makes things a lot more complicated. This goes for the math section as well, where things become even more intricate with 8, 9 blanks, any of which can be right. So you can see that there's a lot of complexity and sophistication coming with the new GRE. Going back to the verbal section, there are also these sentence completions. If you remember the sentence completions from the old GRE, they're now called text completions. And instead of having 1 or 2 blanks, they have 2 or 3 blanks. However, now it's not just a case of 1 in 5, but there will be 3 answer choices for each blank. So essentially that becomes 1 in 9 or 1 in 27 chance of randomly guessing correctly. So things definitely are becoming a lot more complicated on the question types. So then moving forward to other important areas, we want to know how to prepare for the new GRE Verbal. And it is different, as I just went over, and it is similar as well. And it's important to know the overlap. There definitely will still be reading comprehension passages. There will definitely still be vocabulary to be dealt with. And so knowing, again, the overlap as well as the differences is important. Well, what's a great way to familiarize yourself with this is to go to the ETS website and learn about the different question types. For instance, there's a question type called sentence equivalence, which is unique. And the best way to learn about it is simply to go to the ETS site. Now, in general, when you're using materials, stick to the ETS materials as much as possible, because they are the makers of the test, and therefore their content will mirror almost exactly the content you will see test day. And in general, when prepping, you want to make sure that you know why answers are wrong and why the right answers are right. You want to have a good understanding of that versus just guessing or a process of elimination. So once you find the right materials, which again is ETS, know how to prep is of course an important part. But if there's good prep material, there's also definitely bad prep material. Online, you want to watch out for a lot of bad practice questions that are written by anyone, an anonymous person, essentially, or from a test prep company that really hasn't proven themselves. And so that can be a really dangerous way for you to practice, because then you're getting questions that are very unlike the real GRE. Another good use is forums. A way to prep is to go to forums where there are experts. And here at Magoosh, we have our own answers forum where you can ask any question you want, and we will provide the answer. Other important areas in terms of the new GRE, of course, is tackling vocab. I have so many students ask me, so I don't have to really learn vocab anymore, right? The answer, unfortunately, is no. You must still know vocab. The test still relies on your knowledge of vocabulary and the way it's used in sentences, but again, it's more of a big picture or holistic use of words. So I will say definitely that Barron's 3,500 is not necessary. You don't need to know all those 3,500 words. At the same time, you want to have about a 1,500 word vocabulary going in. I know Princeton Review has this book called Word Smart, which I recommend to all my students, which has about 1,500 words. And again, those are words very likely to show up on the actual test. So you still need to learn vocab, but you need to understand the context, the big picture of the actual question. Learning vocab will be similar. You still want to use your mnemonics, your flashcards. However, because you're basing this on a big picture, you want to really improve your reading at certain levels. And this is what I call the elevated level. Pieces that appear in the New Yorker, Atlantic Monthly, New York Times. That's the sort of reading you want to be doing. Because if your brain is used to the syntactical or the sentence structure from these pieces, it's going to begin to pick up on the way words are used on the new GRE. And that's really what the new GRE is testing, not your ability to say, oh, the definition of magnanimous is blah, 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 but really how does magnanimous function in the sentence. So again, that's going to be very important for vocab on the new GRE. Moving on then to additional prep items, prep tips, is you can still use old ETS practice materials. Again, there's overlap. What the benefit would be is that using old ETS practice materials helps with critical thinking and helps you with your vocabulary as well. Again, don't overly rely on old ETS practice material, but know that it's there, and again, know that the new GRE is different and that question types, of course, are something that you can learn about on the ETS website. You can even use GMAT official guide to learn or to practice a specific type of reading comp question called critical reasoning. So again, you want to use a smattering of official material as much as possible. And then, of course, there is Magoosh, which I'll be talking about a little bit more in a minute, how we can help you. And finally, scores was a big question. The new scoring is based on a scale from 130 to 170, verbal and math respectively. thing is, even if you take the test when it comes out on August 1st, you're not going to be receiving your scores until November. So ETS basically has to go behind the scenes there and do all their statistic wizardry to figure out exactly how many questions you can miss to get a certain score. That said, now let's quickly talk about Magoosh content. As Hansu had mentioned, we really strive to have the highest quality content on the market. I mean, this is what we do. This is our focus, and therefore not only do we come up with highest quality content, but we also come up with the best strategies. And this really differs from other companies who essentially dumb down the test and come up with these nifty strategies that seem to work, but they only work for the most basic questions. And so then, of course, you're in for a shock the day of the test, sit for it, and you realize, wow, this is not anything like what I was practicing before. So we really want to save you that surprise, that shock, and we want to provide you with questions that are sometimes even more difficult than those that you'd see on the GRE. And because we have so many questions and because we teach you the best techniques, we allow you to practice those techniques on those questions so that your ability to solve these questions becomes second nature. So that's definitely how we're going to help you here at Magoosh. And now let's go on to the next section. And yes.
I'm going to just start. Okay, so my name is Brent Hanneson, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the new math section on the GRE. And in particular, I'd like to discuss three areas. First, I'd like to discuss the question types you'll see on the new GRE math sections. Talk a little bit about the on-screen calculator that you'll have at your disposal, and talk a little bit about the new math content that is being added to the test as well. So let's begin with question types. First, I should tell you that the new math section, the new GRE test has two math sections as opposed to one. Each math section will have about 20 questions, and you have 35 minutes per section. Now, in each math section, we're going to see three different question types. I'd like to talk a little bit about each question type. So the first is quantitative comparison questions. These are questions that used to be on the SAT, and they look something like this. Here we are given two quantities, and our job is to determine which quantity is greater or whether or not these quantities are equal. In this case, the answer would be A, because column A has a greater quantity than column B. Now, on the new GRE, the very first 7, 8, 9 questions of the math tests will be quantitative comparison questions. So once you take care of those quantitative comparisons questions, you won't see any more of them. Another question type are problem-solving questions, and there will be about 9 questions per section. And there are 3 different types of problem-solving questions. So let's look at each one here. First, we have multiple choice questions where there is only one correct answer, and there will be about 6 of these questions per section. So these are the ones you're most familiar with, of course. You get a question, 5 answer choices, and only one of our answer choices is correct. Now, another problem-solving question is the multiple choice questions, but here we have 1 or more correct answers. So per section, you should get 1 or 2 of these types of questions. And as you'll see, there aren't 5 answer choices. There can be anywhere from 3 to any number of answer choices. And there can be any number of correct answers from 1 all the way down to all of the answer choices are correct. Now, if you want to get this any question correct, you must identify all of the correct answers. So for this question, there are 4 correct answers. And in order to get full marks here, or to get this question correct, you have to answer or identify all 4 correct ones. So if you miss an answer choice, it's wrong. If you answer too many answer choices, it's also wrong. Only the answers that are correct will be correct. Okay, and the last problem-solving question type we'll see are numeric entry questions, and we'll get 1 or 2 of these question types per section as well. In these ones, we have a question. There are no answer choices. We have to determine the answer and then enter the correct answer in that box. Now, there are two types of numeric entry questions. So there's this one where we have just one box, and we'll also see numeric entry questions where there are two boxes. These are questions where the answer will be in the form of a fraction. So here we have to enter a numerator and a denominator. Okay, so then there are some important things we need to know about numeric entry questions. First of all, if we want to enter a negative sign, we have to type a hyphen. For a decimal point, we need to type a period on your keyboard. The next one is really important. It says that we must enter the exact answer unless directed otherwise. So, for example, if we have a question like this, generic question where we have to find the value of x, and let's say we use our on-screen calculator to find that the value of x is equal to 4.28. If we round that answer to something like 4.3, that question will be marked wrong. We have to enter the exact answer that we get. Now, conversely, we will also have questions for numeric entry questions where you're asked to round your answer to some nearest value, nearest tenth, 100th, or so on. So here, if we were to enter 4.28 as our answer, it would be incorrect. We have to round that off to the nearest tenth. Okay, what else do we need to know about numeric entry questions? Well, we need to know that equivalent values are correct unless we're directed otherwise to round the answer. So, for example, let's say we are told that a circle has a radius of 3 inches, and we want to know the diameter of the circle. Well, the diameter here is 6, which would be correct. Now, since the question does not ask us to round the answer, it would be equally fine to enter 6.0 or 6.00. These would all be correct. However, if the question did say something like round our answer to the nearest unit, then we would have to enter 6. That would be correct, but 6.00 in that case would be incorrect. The last tip for numeric entry questions, and it kind of falls along the same lines as the last tip, is equivalent fractions are all correct. So, for example, here we have 10 chips. 4 of them are blue. So here the probability that a randomly selected chip will be blue will be equal to 4/10. Now, if we were to enter this simplified version of this fraction, 2/5, that would also be correct. In fact, any fraction that's equivalent to 4/10 or 2/5 would be correct. That's totally fine. Okay, so that's it for problem-solving questions. The last question type is data interpretation questions, and there will be about 3 of these questions per section. Here you're given some kind of chart or table or some collection of data, and you will be given 3 questions related to that one particular set of data. So these questions can be your typical find the one correct answer choice type questions. They can be ones where you have to identify one or more correct answers, or they can even be numeric entry questions. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the different types of questions you're going to see on the new GRE test. Now let's talk a little bit about this on-screen calculator. I should begin by saying that I think a lot of students are very happy that they get to have a calculator now. I would say that you probably shouldn't be too happy about it. I think I think people should recognize, hopefully I can convince you of this, in fact, that this calculator, if anything, is actually going to slow you down for a couple of reasons. First of all, this only has basic operations. So unlike your typical scientific calculator where you have all sorts of great buttons for doing counting questions or exponents, that kind of thing, this just has your bare bones operations. Also, you have to use your mouse to select each button you want to press, which is very clunky. Also, a real limitation here is this 8-digit maximum. So your display only holds 8 digits. So if you try to perform some calculation where the answer is more than 8 digits long, you'll get an error message. So what the GRE now is going to do with this is that they'll give you questions that essentially render your calculator useless. So for example, in the past, when you were not allowed to use a calculator, you might get a question like this. So here you had a couple of options. One option was to just do the work, find 102 times 102 and then subtract 98 squared from that. To solve this question quickly and pretty well in your head, all you needed to do here was recognize that we can factor this as follows to get an answer of 800. Now, of course, the GRE, the new GRE, will not include questions like this because your calculator could do this in 10 seconds. So instead, what they're going to do is they'll give you questions like this, which basically make the calculator ineffective because 20,002 squared is actually a 9-digit number. So if you tried performing this calculation on your calculator, you'll get an error message. So here now you're pretty well limited to recognizing that this can be factored as a difference of squares to get our answer of 160,000. If you were to try to do all the calculations here and find 20,002 squared, it's going to take you forever. So in some regards, this calculator is actually going to be more prohibitive because if you're forced to do the calculations by hand, they're going to be bigger calculations than, as you can see, the calculations would have been for this question. Okay, so if you are going to use your calculator, and I'm going to go on a limb here and say that you probably shouldn't be using your calculator for at least 99 questions out of 100, right? But if you are going to use this calculator, make sure you get really familiar with it. So download the free test prep software from ETS and spend a lot of time fiddling with this calculator because it's clunky and it may be considerably different from the calculator that you're used to using. In particular, you should really get used to these memory buttons and clear buttons because they're going to really speed up your work if you do use the calculator. So for example, the memory plus button or the M plus button memorizes whatever number's on the screen so that you can now erase whatever's on the screen, do a bunch of calculations, and then recall that number at a later date by pressing the MR button. The MC button will clear whatever number is in the calculator's memory at that time. The C button will pretty well clear the calculator of everything. And a good one here is the CE button, which clears only your last entry. So if you're performing some really lengthy calculation, and at the end you have one last calculation, you need to multiply whatever number you have so far by 10, and let's say you accidentally type in 11. Well, instead of redoing all of your calculations, all you need to do is press your CE button here. That'll get rid of the 11 and allow you to press 10 and continue with your calculations. So, make sure you get used to all of these buttons. Two more things. Another kind of a clunky thing. If you want to enter a negative number, you have to enter the negative sign after entering your number. So if I want to enter -8, I have to press 8 first and then the negative plus or minus symbol right here. And one last interesting feature of this calculator is that we have this transfer display button at the very bottom of the calculator, which can be useful because if you press that button and you're solving some kind of numeric entry question where there's only a single answer box, the calculator will take whatever numbers in the display and automatically transfer it into your numeric entry question, which can save you some time. Of course, it can also be a problem if the question, for example, says something like round your answer to the nearest tenth. The calculator doesn't know that it has to round the answer to the nearest tenth, so when it transfers whatever number you have to the box, you have to make sure that you take that number and now round it to whatever value you're supposed to round it to. Okay, so that's the on-screen calculator. As I said, I urge you to still try to do questions without using that calculator. It's going to cause more problems, I think, than it's going to be of any use. Finally, the new math content. Now, the GRE has really beefed up their math content. It used to be the case that their math content was almost identical to the content on the GMAT, and now they've added a lot of stuff. Most notably, they've added a lot of statistics concepts, beginning with relative frequency distributions. So in the past, there used to be questions on the GRE about frequency distributions, and these distributions basically tell you the number of times some value occurs, whereas relative frequency distributions tell us the percentage of times that certain values occur. So these two ideas aren't that much different, but it's still a new concept that they've added. A big one they've added to the stats side of things is normal distributions. So these are distributions of values that have this bell-shaped curve. A few things you need to know about this is that the mean of the values occurs right at the center of this distribution. These distributions are symmetrical about the mean. A big one is knowing that in a normal distribution, about 68% of all of the values will fall within one standard deviation of the mean, and about 95 or 96% of all the values will fall within two standard deviations of the mean. So this is some important stuff you need to know, and the remaining 4% fall outside those boundaries. What else do we need to know about stats? We need to know sample standard deviation. So up until recently, up until the new test, we've had to know about population standard deviations, and now they've introduced this idea of sample standard deviations. The big difference between these two in their calculations is that the numerator is different in both of them, I guess. You'll learn more about these types of deviations, standard deviations in your studies. Another addition is this notion of quartiles. In a nutshell, a quartile takes some series of numbers or data, and it basically divides that data into four regions, essentially. And closely related to this idea of quartiles are box plots. Essentially, box plots take our information about quartiles and present them in a different format. As you can tell, I'm kind of glossing over this stuff. You'll need to know more about it, but the big idea here is that these are just additional concepts that are being added to the GRE. So that's it for the stats. On the geometry side of things, they've added similar triangles and congruent triangles. So you need to know a little bit about those. And they've also added quite a bit of content to the coordinate geometry side of things. So for example, you need to know how to solve systems of linear inequalities, such as this one. So here, the solution to this system of linear inequalities will be the region that both inequalities share. That's pretty tough stuff. Also added to the coordinate geometry are the graphs of more shapes. So in the past, you just needed to know about the graphs of lines. Now you need to know all about the graphs of circles, parabolas, absolute values, and square roots. You also need to know how to transform these graphs. For example, let's say we want to graph the function y equals x minus 2 squared minus 5. We first start out by recognizing that y equals x squared looks something like this. So if we want to graph y equals x minus 2 squared minus 5, we take our original graph and translate it 2 units to the right and 5 units down. We're also required under transformations to know how to compress and expand graphs, and we also need to know a little bit about reflections. So for example, if we take our original graph here and replace x with negative x, we need to know that this will result in a reflection of our original graph across the y-axis, essentially, to get this new graph. Okay, so these are the new topics that they're adding to the GRE, new GRE test. So make sure that whatever resources you're using to prepare have some instruction around these topics. Okay, that's pretty much it for me, and I'm going to introduce you to Dave Scalise, who will cover the verbal section.
So once you understand what they're testing, you can then develop your own little study plan to meet that challenge. What we do, we research hundreds of past questions, and from that we get a lot of notions about what kind of testing they're doing, what kind of questions. We mock the subject matter, the syntax, and of course the level of difficulty and formats. But our approach is grounded in analysis. That is our strength, is to show you exactly how to tear apart the GRE and put it back together in a way that will make sense to you. Reading comprehension, the new reading comprehension has 3 components: passages, question stems, and responses. With the passages, you got to read with an attitude. These are boring passages for the most part. They don't have anything of interest really. Why don't they talk about food or travel? No, of course not. So you got to engage the material. You got to take notes either on the whiteboard or the paper that the proctor gives you for reference. And we also endorse skimming. This is what skimming looks like animated. You read the first sentence or two, skim down the middle of the page, looking for keywords, and in this instance, look at the conclusion as well. We also look at question stems. That's the second piece of the puzzle. And there are 5 on the new GRE, maybe 6. Main idea, that's central theme. Hunt and peck, that takes you back to the passage. Organization, that's the passage structure. Inference, suggestions. And vocabulary in context. No vocabulary standing alone, but rather you glean your answer by the surrounding words and phrases. So vocabulary in context. So we give you some exercises where we just give you a question stem and you tell us what kind it is. And you get used to identifying the question stems, and that really puts you in a position to reach the credited response. We're real big on exercises that are peripheral to the actual questions but give you some support. And oddly enough, we're very much into the responses. These are the 3 to 5 question responses that appear on the exam. For the most part, you're going to have ones that engage the passage, but by and large, 80% will be 5 or 3 response. There's 1 credit response and 4 distractors. And of course, distractors are designed by the test maker to misdirect you. So what we're really doing here is studying wrong answers. There are main idea distractors, too broad, too narrow, hunt and peck, may contradict the sentence or the passage, inference, faulty logic, vocabulary and context. Perhaps you don't have the right vocabulary word. And we have distractor drills. This one's on main ideas. And what you do on a distractor drill is get used to recognizing an incorrect answer and having a reason, actually articulating a reason to discard it. So here we have a passage. The question is, the primary point of this passage is to, and then 3 answer choices. First one is too broad. That's a typical distractor test makers will introduce. Or number 2 is too narrow, and number 3 is just right. And that's what makes these reading comp question sets so difficult. It's the answer responses are so closely shaded that you can't discriminate, you can't determine, you can't ascertain which is the correct one. So you've got to learn to recognize not only the correct response, but the distractors as well. Let's turn to one of the new formats. This is called Select a Sentence. So what you have here is a short paragraph, a short passage, I should say, maybe 130, 40 words on baseball arbitration. And at the very bottom then it says select a sentence. So all the sentences in this passage are highlighted in a sense. They're activated, I should say. So as you move your cursor across the passage, they will come highlighted to you, and you have to select one, in this case, that discloses the protocol for this dispute resolution. Now, here's the sentence, this is the answer. So you have to look very closely at the question again. Let's identify it again. It discloses the protocol is the one we're looking for, and the credited response describes the process of this form of arbitration. So we've got a match there, and thereby this question is the one giving you the correct response. This is they're using technology of the time now and integrating it into the instrument, testing instrument, and you've really got to be in tune with these new formats. They also have one called reference to highlighted sentence, where they'll have a passage. This one is on baseball arbitration, and you could have the same passage come up 2 or 3 different times, and they would have different questions. So you really got to be aware of the question type and the format. This one deals with arbitral participants, and then they'll give you a short question stem and typically the 5 answer choices, so that you've got to decide about what this highlighted sentence is all about. So you're back and forth between the passage, which will be adjacent to the question, and that eye movement can be very fatiguing. You've got to get used to this. This is probably the most time-intensive question set on the exam. It's why we do so poorly. People don't know how to prepare for it. We have some strategies. They are actually fairly simplistic, and you can adopt them rather easily. Here's the answer E for this particular question, the highlighted sentence format. Now this one is going to be rare. We've only seen one of these, and I don't know if they're going to use it very much. This is where they bold two different sentences in the passage. Note this one is separated. These two sentences are separated by a short sentence, and they'll ask you about the relationship between the sentence. So they talk about the two sentences in boldface play which of the following roles. I think these are most difficult. Typically, you get the 5 answer responses, multiple choice. And in this case, only one answer is the correct one. E is your response. The second component on the new GRE is called text completion. It is a holdover, and we're going to delve very deeply into clues because these sentences are not just haphazardly thrown together. They're artfully drafted, well thought out, and they're trying to test certain student attributes again. For example, if you look at the first 2 words, that phrase rather than is what we call a contrast word, which is announcing to us that this sentence is going to take a shift or a drift. Rather than encouraging an open dialogue and soliciting ideas. Note these 2 phrases are near synonymous, and linked with rather than leads us to the blank as a situation where we're going to change directions increasingly. Great adverb, very intense, and as it modifies the blank, we're looking for a word that means increasingly, probably referring to the speaking style of the author. And we go through each of the answer choices, finding a reason to discard the incorrect answer choices, and settling on C, didactic. Now, if you didn't know the meaning of didactic, you could probably eliminate the other 4, and it would be your choice by default. So we list all the clues from past GRE exams. Those are in opposition, are words that hold elements of the sentence in contradiction or contrast. And here are the lists. So once you see one of these, you'll learn to identify, there's going to be a change, there's going to be a contrast upcoming, and I want to look for it. We also have these words, these clues that are in apposition, that is in agreement. So they hold phrases or words or terms or elements of the sentence that are in agreement. We have clues that indicate a causal relationship, cause-effect relationship between elements in the sentence, and we also have those that illustrate or explain. So you learn to recognize these clues and what they mean, their function. Let me give you an example. Let's take this first question. Here's a text completion, 1 blank. So you read the sentence and you see the terms normally function, the pack normally function. However, there's a contrast word, there's a clue. There's something that happened that disrupted their harmony. Normal, however, disrupted. It must have been an interloper. So you start looking at the sentence structure as well as the clues, and pretty soon you're reading these sentences and from a wholly different perspective. And when you start doing that, you're going to be boosting your scores. Here's one on description or illustration, talking about a subdivision. There was a blemish, lacked variety, and the yards were unkempt. So this, after the colon, this long phrase then describes the subdivision as an eyesore. Well, we think the clues are so important, we've designed some exercises. Try this one. She was always blank in social settings, the center of attention. What do you think? A, showy, B, ostentatious, maybe fashionable. So it reads as though it speaks to somehow how she appears. Not so. Let's add the critical language. Just put in the clues, and notice here, when you add the clues, it doesn't deal so much with her appearance as it does to her behavior. I like gregarious. Now here's a plugging in strategy that we encourage you to employ. So we'll give you a sentence, and you then would put in some words that mean not stylish. Think about a word now. I remember yesterday Margaret was working this one, and the word she came up was heinous. Go, heinous? That's pretty extreme. We're talking about dress consciousness here. But that's okay, because once you come up with your own words, then you can compare it to the answer choices, and you're going to find a match a good number of times. 3 words I have here are unacceptable, taboo, and forbidden. You don't see heinous here. Now here are the 2 blank question types, and when you see our audio and video presentations on the learning platform of Magoosh, this is the last screenshot you're going to see. And what this is such a piece of learning for you, because you've got all the critical language underlined, you have the 2 correct answers indicated, you've got the wrong answers struck, and then you have explanations for each of them, all on one page. So this is a lasting imprint for you when you go from question to question. And likewise, here's a 3 blank text completion question. Again, this is what you would see, trying to put everything on one page. So there's as much audio as there is video on these, and these are what we call practice questions. And we went through some of the exercises that we refer to as lessons. So the lessons help you prepare for practice. That's the idea. I had a golf coach once that said, "Dave, you need to take golf lessons." I said, "Why? I go to the range." He says, "Precisely, that's the reason, because when you go to the range, if you haven't had lessons, you just practice bad shots and bad swings." Good point. So you need to first take the lessons and then practice, practice, practice. One more of the verbal reasoning question types now introduced is the sentence equivalent. Similar skills to text completion, and this one again we use a lot of clues, underscoring, but note there are in this case 6 choices and you have to pick 2. Now, you don't necessarily pick synonyms, but you pick 2 questions that independently, when plugged into the sentence, will complete the meaning of the sentence. And the 2 I have are tepid and subdued. The other 4 are probably ones that we expected from our person in the subject in the sentence, but the word curiously takes us to answers B and F. Thank you very much.
So we're going to start with one of the questions that Ayushi sent. She asked, what is a comparable score in the new format compared to the other ones? And I'm going to send this one over to Chris so you can talk a little bit about changes to scoring.
Okay. This is actually kind of a tricky question to answer because no one really knows the answer as of yet. ETS has to figure out exactly what the percentage rankings will be on the new GRE, which they won't be able to do until November. However, we still have a general idea of what the scores will equate to. And one thing you can do is you can go to or look at the new GRE book that's available on the market, and on the back they have a projected percentile ranking. So you can, for instance, see that they project that about 95% of students are going to get a certain score. And you can say, well, what's 95% on this current test? Also, you'll notice that in that same book that there'll be, for instance, a scale from 330 to 170. The 800 score could be anywhere from 170 to about 100 and I think it's all the way down to almost 155 on the math section. So they're really unsure exactly what an 800 is going to end up being. So to answer that question, no one really knows now, but you can get a general idea if you look at the ETS ranking system that's available in the book that's on the market entitled the Practice or the New GRE Test.
Thanks for that, Chris. Now I think I have a question that Brent could probably answer. This is from Rupak. He says, I think due to the calculator, the questions may be a little bit more difficult for the quantitative section. What do you think, Brent?
I think, I'm not too sure if the calculator is going to make things more difficult. Certainly the content will make the questions more difficult. Yeah, I guess in some regards, yes, because in the old days, there was, always 2 ways to solve a question. And one of them was always brute force. You just go and do the calculations, and you kind of get penalized time-wise for that. To take the the calculator out of the equation, they need to make those calculations even more problematic. So yeah, I think that will, I guess, make it more difficult, because it typically will reduce your options in some regards anyway down to just one. What would have been the best approach in the past.
Thanks for that, Brent. Now we have another one, I think, for Professor Dave. Rupak asked another question, which is, which type of reading material would be best to focus on for reading comprehension, sort of for prep material? Can you chime in on that, Professor Dave?
The GRE test makers say that they rely on all the sciences, biological, physical, and also arts, humanities, and topics of the day. So topical reading, certainly, like Wall Street Journal. I like what Chris said about the New Yorker. It's sophisticated writing. We mock the subject matter, so if they're talking about the Civil War, we're talking about the Civil War. Historical pieces are fine. You want to stay within that realm. For example, we've not seen one on baseball or World Cup soccer ever, and I don't think you will. It'd be too biased, one side or the other. So upbeat reading, technical reading, and read in an analytical fashion. After you read a passage or a paragraph, contemplate what you just read, and even conjure up a potential question that could have been written on that brief piece. Good luck.
Okay, and thank you for that, Professor Dave. I think this is going to be our last question from Amy. I'm going to send it over to Chris. She asks, I think, which is a pretty popular question, in general, this new test seems more difficult. Do you recommend taking the old test quickly before it goes away? What do you think, Chris?
Well, okay, yeah, great question, one I've heard from quite a few people now. And I think the best answer to this, again, it really depends on your skill set. So if you feel that vocabulary is your strong suit, you're used to analogies, you're used to antonyms, you've maybe even done a lot of prep work yourself for the current GRE, then I would say definitely take it. Because the new GRE, while similar to the current GRE, is still different. So you're going to have this ramp-up time of learning, you know, the idiosyncrasies of the test, the new question types, the multiple answer questions, etc. So you really have to see where you stand. Now, I tell students that a good thing to do is you can either go on the GRE site, or again, you can buy the actual ETS book that's on the market for the new GRE and actually take a test, get a feel for it. Are you actually better at it because you have a sense, oh, I know the context, I can easily identify the word? Or do you feel a little bit overwhelmed? Wow, there's so many words here, I'd rather just see vocabulary, wouldn't be able to define it. And of course, the same would go with the math. Are the multiple answer choices throwing you off, etc. So I'd do that as soon as you possibly could, because signing up for the current GRE, I think you only have a little bit of time left. So hope that helps.
Thanks for that, Chris. We've got so many questions, and we'd love to go through all of them, but we don't have time for them currently in the webinar. We'll get them up on the blog, text format, both question and answer. So every single question, if you submitted it, don't worry, we're not ignoring them. We'll definitely get to them, so you will get an answer. So now we're going to switch over to Hansu. He's going to do a quick wrap-up of the webinar and just all of the content we've gone over previously. So stay tuned. We're just about to be finished. Thanks.
Thanks, Margaret, and thanks, everybody, for attending. We're just going to spend the last couple of minutes reviewing the products that we have for the new GRE. We're going to be sending you an email tomorrow, so look out in your email tomorrow, and we'll give you a special secret discount for the new GRE product for attending today's webinar. So thanks for attending, and look out for your email from us tomorrow as a special thank you for attending. And so you might be asking, what do you get with Magoosh New GRE? Well, you get over 600 practice questions. These questions are as close as you're going to get to taking the actual exam. We've developed questions for all the new content and question types that we've talked about today. And with every question, you get a video explanation and a written explanation. So if you're learn best by hearing or seeing or reading or all of the above, we can provide those different learning tactics for you. You can also create custom practice sessions by section, by subject, by difficulty level, and you can even take questions in what we call quiz mode or practice mode, where you can see questions either after each question or at the end of your practice session. We also give you stats that give you the difficulty level of each question and compare your pace to the pace of the typical students. We also provide email support for all of your questions. The team here is very responsive. We usually answer your question within a couple of hours and definitely within 24 hours. And we give you access for as long as you need. If you're taking the exam next week, next month, or next year, you can access Magoosh GRE for as long as you need it. And finally, we give you a money-back guarantee. We spent a lot of time, as I mentioned, building the best product for the new GRE on the market, and we're confident in the content and the product, and so we guarantee that with a money-back guarantee. So if you're not at all satisfied with the product, feel free to contact us, and we'll give you your money back. So thanks for listening. Thanks for attending today's webinar. This concludes the Magoosh New GRE webinar. Come visit us at newgre.magoosh.com and feel free to contact us at any time with all of your GRE questions. Thanks a lot and best wishes in your studies.